Introducing the right-wing war on education, starring Betsy DeVos, evangelical Christians, and a few dudes who rented out strip malls, called themselves schools, and stole your public school tax dollars.
And on the third day, God created the Remington bolt-action rifle so that man could fight the dinosaurs and the homosexuals. Amen.
In this hour, we'll talk about how Republicans want to dumb our kids down and what we have to do to stop them. As always, leading the conversation is Patti Vasquez. But with her, we have Kirk Bangstad of the Minocqua Brewing Company, who is leading the charge to get rid of the parasitic voucher school system in Wisconsin. And a few fellow public education warriors he brought along to educate us. The right-wing war on education is brought to you by the Minocqua Brewing Company. Take it away, Patti.
Yes, we are excited to join you tonight for our conversation about the right-wing war on public education. Filling in for our fearless leader today is Frederick Melms, who is one of the lead attorneys on the case suing the state of Wisconsin and the voucher system. Fred, how are you doing today?
Excellent. How about yourself?
I'm doing very well. I'm excited to have this conversation. And I know that we have gathered folks over the last several weeks to talk about the different elements of this. We've talked about the history of the voucher system, not just in Wisconsin, but across the state, across the country. And we've talked a lot about the impacts it's had, as we mentioned, the parasitic nature of the voucher system, these pop-up schools, the school education for profit. And this week, we are going to talk about how this is really impacting a community. And Fred, have you been working with Mayor Cory Mason and with Angela Cruz?
This is the first time meeting them, but I'm very excited to hear from them both. Well, Angelina, did we talk a month and a half ago?
Maybe.
Did I call you?
Beginning of the school year.
Yeah, I talked to a lot of people about the voucher program about 2 months ago. There was a big list. I couldn't remember if you were on it, but
a lot of conversations.
We've got Angela Cruz, who's the president of the Racine Educators Association, and Mayor Cory Mason, who's the mayor of Racine and former Wisconsin Assembly. So how are you guys doing today?
Doing great. Thanks for having us on.
Excellent. And for folks who aren't familiar, the General Assembly of Wisconsin is a supermajority Republican. And they do a lot of these really nasty shenanigans where they withhold funding in certain ways to the areas of Wisconsin that tend to skew more Democrat, like perhaps, let's say, Milwaukee. And the separate voucher program that is targeted at Racine is something we're going to be talking about today. And I know that this started in 2011, and they're now in the last year, there's oh my God, there's 31 private schools participating in this program. So Angelina, let's start with you and talk about the impact that the voucher system is having on Racine, Wisconsin.
All right. Well, let's dive into it.
Let's dive right into it.
Right. So I guess at the micro level, I get into the weeds of what this actually looks like in a classroom on a day-to-day basis. So I think at the cellular level in a school district, the ways in which it has most impacted Racine Unified School District is in terms of staffing, is in terms of our ability as educators to deliver the services that are promised to kids who attend public schools. And I think those are probably the two biggest impacts, particularly thinking about we have a very high needs student population. We have a very large special education student population. And so in thinking about not just the Racine Parental Choice Program and not just the special needs scholarship program, but also the ways in which voucher schools are reimbursed versus the way that public schools are reimbursed for the costs of servicing special education students. They are reimbursed at higher rates. So 90+% goes to voucher schools for special education reimbursement, whereas public schools are holding at about a 31%. That might be higher than it actually is. So, and that I also like to emphasize to people that voucher schools are under no legal obligation to provide special education services to their students with IEPs. So In most, if not in all cases, it is public school educators who are deployed to voucher schools, private schools that are receiving vouchers to provide those services to those students. And so that impacts obviously the services also that we're able to provide to special needs public school students. And so, I mean, I could go on.
No. I know that you've been a teacher in Racine for quite a while. Were you a teacher prior to this program starting in 2011?
Yes, I was. I started teaching in 2003. 2003, I was a baby teacher. So at this point, I am a veteran educator of Racine Unified School District. I was a regular education teacher. I started in elementary. I taught fifth grade for over a decade, and my last year in the classroom was as a sixth grade teacher. So it's been quite the journey in witnessing the transformation of our public school system. And I mean, 20 years, it sounds like a long time, but it's pretty quick. Or at least I like to think it's a pretty quick snapshot of time in which we've sort of watched this really sad arc of the impact that the program has had. So
I want to talk about that in a moment too, because I also want to introduce the mayor, Mayor Mason. I know that you were born and raised in Racine and graduated from Case High School, correct?
Yes, correct.
And now, did you see support for the Racine Unified School District when you were growing up, or as a graduate?
Quite a bit. Yeah, I mean, the public school system was a big part of the reason people would move to the Racine area, just because the public school system had such a great reputation. The high school I went to, Case, had an international baccalaureate program early on when that wasn't so common. Got to attend a number of magnet schools, a fine arts elementary school, and a Walden for middle school, which is an alternative middle school, high school that gave great educational opportunities to me as an individual and to the broader community. It was our public school system was one of the reasons that people would decide to move to Racine.
And was there a push? I mean, in your lifetime, prior to 2011 and the program starting there, were there parents clamoring for choice, or is this something that you've seen kind of erupt sort of afterwards? Go, oh yeah, it seems like there's a lot of manipulation of the messaging in these situations.
Yeah, I mean, parochial schools have always been around in Racine and across the state and across the country, and so there's always been parents who decided for sectarian reasons, because they wanted their kids to get a religious education. That was always part of it. But there was a time in previous generations where there wasn't this expectation that other taxpayers were going to fund your child's religious education. So it's always been, a place where that had a place, but there's never an expectation that there was going to be a secondary school system that was going to be set up really without adequately funding the public school system that was there. And so, it's really, I mean, this isn't something that citizens in Racine were asking for. It was something that was done to Racine. There weren't people asking for it. We are the home community of some people who are in leadership in the Wisconsin legislature. And I think that's as much of the reason that we got chosen as the place to be, this place to experiment with public schools and really, putting an additional school district on the property tax rolls. And, the promise of it was that if we did these vouchers, it was a rising tide was going to lift all boats, and it was going to take care of, the public schools and the voucher schools, and all the kids were going to learn better. And, 2 decades into it, it just hasn't lived up to that promise. And it's been a 1-2 punch of never adequately funding public schools to the level they needed to adequately educate every child, which is what the state constitution requires us to do. And then at the same time, peeling resources and students away from a public school system. I mean, look, Racine's a working class town. It's always been a place where, people make living wages as best they can. And if they don't, they always knew that there was an opportunity to go to a great public school system and work their way into the middle class. And so the backbone of having a strong middle class here in the city of Racine has been a strong public school system. And as we've seen the legislature and out-of-state, right-wing ideologues tinker around with this and, making our community into an experimentation for this right-wing idea, we've seen disparities in education get worse, not better. We've seen kids really struggle. And, to Angelina's point, we have kids with above average needs. The public schools are the school district that will take everybody, unlike some of the other schools who will pick and choose which kids they're willing to educate. And so it's really put a lot of pressure on the public schools. But, as a mayor who's deeply invested in the future of our community, I know full well that the future success of our city is directly tied to the future success of our public schools, which is why I feel so strongly that we don't just need good schools, we need good public schools if we're going to educate the next generation of our workforce and the next generation of citizens that we need to really perpetuate our community and our democracy.
Fred, you are taking this case to the Supreme Court of Wisconsin, and we see that it was almost $600 million in total voucher spending for the for 23-24 school year. When you are making these arguments, are you looking at the impact and showing the data of these aren't improvements for schools, and it's fundamentally hurting the public schools?
So we are, to a point. None of our arguments really rely on the effect of the public school funding. We're really going directly to the mechanisms, right? So we're alleging that the mechanisms themselves and not the outcomes are unconstitutional. Now, obviously, the outcomes to people like Mayor Mason and Angela Cruz are far more important. But from a legal perspective, our strategy is, I think, I guess our strategy allows us to do more by focusing less on the actual outcome and more on the mechanism. Now, we do talk about all of that in our petition and the effects of the outcome, but the actual challenges themselves are effectively pre-outcome. But I would actually also have a question for Mayor Mason here. When you were in the state assembly and got to know some of your I guess compatriots down there, maybe on the other side of the aisle, do you think that this was written in such a way that it was actually intended to defund public schools and not really just fund a voucher program? Because that's, looking at the statutes themselves, that's really the only conclusion I've been able to come to, is that this is an intentional push for privatization and not just trying to provide an alternative.
Yeah, I mean, it's a long and sad trend to try to underfund or defund public education, right? So it's not like all of our public schools were adequately funded when vouchers came along, right? I mean, they've always been under-resourced to be able to do what we'd hoped them to be able to do. But what you have with the voucher system is it really accelerates that, right? And so if you don't adequately fund the public schools, and at the same time you add state revenues and then local property tax revenues on top of that, that makes the property tax bills that my residents have to pay more expensive. And it also creates a space where the kids that are in those schools don't have the resources that they need to be fully successful citizens. So it's really been a 1-2 punch. And again, I think I don't think this was ever driven by like a grassroots groundswell of people in Racine asking for these things. It was really more driven of, there's some real national interests here that are looking to find a space where we can really take vouchers to the next level and try to take it to specific cities, and then you're seeing them trying to bring it statewide and nationwide. And so unfortunately, we were one of the first places to experiment with it. But big picture, it's promise of, hey, if we get competition and create a second school district, that's going to make sure that all the kids do great. Just hasn't been the case. We've not adequately funded the public schools in need to make sure that all of our kids can achieve and be contributing citizens. And it's come at the expense of creating a second school district, which we didn't need to do. What we needed to do was adequately fund a school district so that all of our kids could succeed, not create voucher systems where you create systems where kids get cherry picked out of the system, and the kids that remain might have above average needs but don't have the resources they need.
Wow. And Angelina, to that, you mentioned earlier that some of the impact that you're seeing as a teacher, someone who's been there since 2003, essentially this happened almost in the middle of your teaching career where the voucher system started. What are some of the other changes that you have seen? Because you've witnessed, perhaps students who are and their families trying to make these decisions, and am I better off here? And it causes a lot of anxiety for families too.
Yeah, absolutely. So I thank you. I really do want to underscore, I did talk about our special ed population as being a very high needs population. But there's a domino effect on all of our students. So when we have to shift resources to provide these services that we are legally obligated to provide to special needs students, it detracts from the general fund, and what we can provide to our regular ed students again. So that what that's looked like and how that's panned out moving forward is cuts in extracurricular activities that we can offer, different course offerings that are available for students to take. You know, we have an IB program, we have an advanced placement program. And so I know right now the district is looking at moving forward. We keep hearing about this looming deficit that they're going to have to grapple with next year. They're looking at different programs that are offered to students that they may have to consider cutting, whether it's because of their ability to staff the programs or whether it's their ability to buy curriculum for programs. And so it has a ripple effect on literally every aspect of schooling. And so it's very, very difficult. The district has had a number of very difficult decisions to make. And I do want to point out the community of Racine, particularly the city of Racine, supported a referendum in 2020. It was an operational referendum. We have another piece of it is the age of our buildings and the district's ability to you know, they've deferred maintenance for, you know, because they can't afford things. But in 2020, we passed an operational referendum because our buildings, some of them were built before the Civil War. And so we have really old facilities. And we believe, I know Mayor Mason was a big supporter of the referendum. The local teachers union was a big supporter of the referendum. The community came together and said our kids deserve modern day facilities. And so that is something that we leveraged as a community, but that's in response to the state largely being negligent in terms of their obligation to fully fund public education at the local level. So, you know, it's 2023. And if you look at the trend at the state level of funding, we are funding public schools at the local. The state is funding local school districts at a lower level than they were a decade ago. And that is completely unacceptable, particularly when they're coupling it with an increase to voucher, increase in investment into the voucher program. So I know this year, the 23-24 school year, there's been an $8 million increase to the voucher revenue locally in Racine, or it's increased by 28.2%. Whereas funding in public education has remained flat. So, you know, when Frederick asks, is this an intentional plan to privatize the public school system? I mean, it's hard to find evidence that would be to the contrary of that from my perspective. So.
Yeah. And if I could just add, so, I mean,
Absolutely.
I know what it's like to have to put a budget together and a balanced budget every year. And I know sometimes when you have to face hard budgets when you've got budget shortfalls, but you know, the Racine Unified is talking about a deficit right now of some tens of millions of dollars where they've got to figure out how to plug these holes at a time when kids really need the resources and the city really needs good public schools. The state of Wisconsin has a $4 billion surplus right now. So it's not as though they can't find the resources or there's no way that they could make these investments, that they have to make hard choices. They're simply choosing not to. I mean, they're simply deciding, you know, at the higher ed level and the K-12 level, they're simply deciding that they're not going to invest in these resources and give kids the resources they need. So it's not out of some sort of fiscal necessity or budget shortfall where people have to make tough choices and everyone's got to, you know, do their fair share to take a hit. This is specifically deciding in a time of record surpluses to underfund public schools and cities for that matter, but it is a very deliberate choice.
So you have, okay, in Racine, you have 2,000 students in the public school district and 4,000 in the Racine school. Is that right? That's one of the notes that I'm seeing on the chat. okay, so it's how many students do you have in the voucher programs?
We are missing a zero.
20,000. There was a zero that was missing.
Right.
Okay. I was like, that definitely sounds out of whack. All right.
Yeah.
So 20, I was going to say that I would say, I've driven through Racine. It seemed bigger. So 20,000 kids in the public schools and 4,000 in the Racine voucher schools. And the state is spending more on the voucher program than it does for public schools. As you mentioned, Mayor Mason, they have a surplus in Wisconsin. This is specifically, it seems intended to harm communities like Racine. I mean, they're not going to say that, but I mean, I don't know what the end goal is.
They
for
say
that.
that. They're not shy about it. I mean, it's not a conspiracy. They just come out and say it. So I mean, they're very deliberate and targeted about the things that they say about it. I mean, they're not particularly interested in investing in cities, and they're not particularly interested in investing in public schools. And they've become more and more candid about, the political or cultural reasons why they don't want to invest in those institutions. I mean, they're, I don't agree with the decisions they make, but they're not hiding behind some sort of, fiscal conservatism to do it. They're pretty upfront about why they're doing it and why they invest where they do and why they disinvest where they do. And, certainly they've been pretty candid about it. So, I mean, again, it's not a conspiracy when you're out front and telling everybody why you're doing it. Nobody should be surprised by it. We just need to get to a place where you've got, fair politics that can still exist in the state of Wisconsin, and hopefully get back to a place where public education, makes a difference again. I mean, we have a governor who's run statewide twice now as governor, being the superintendent of public schools, where he put public education front and center of his message. And I would argue part of the reason he was able to win successfully so many times is because people still value public education. It's just we have a very gerrymandered legislature that does not, and has a very different agenda about what they want to do. And it's places like Racine and kids who go to Racine Unified who will suffer for it.
Unbelievable.
Patty,
yes, go ahead.
If you're wondering about how extreme this gets, I think it was 2 or maybe 3 years ago, our assembly and I believe the Senate passed a bill that would allow 18-year-olds to carry concealed weapons in high school. And Evers didn't sign, and it may have just been the assembly, but that's the sort of thing they do. When Robin Voss sees someone do something conservative in another state, his response is, "Hold my beer, I'm going to outdo them." So that's what they're dealing with on the legislative level.
Wow, we're about to take a break here. We're talking about the right-wing war on public education in Wisconsin. Joining us is Frederick Melms, who's one of the attorneys leading the charge in the lawsuit against the state of Wisconsin. We have Angelina Cruz, who is the president of the Racine Educators Association, an affiliate of the Wisconsin Educators Association Council, and was elected by her peers. They want a representation of somebody who has been in this battle and understands what the challenges are. And we're also joined by Cory Mason, who's I'm sorry, I didn't mean to call you by your first name, sir. You've earned the title of Mayor Mason of Racine, who was formerly a member of the Wisconsin Assembly, serving Racine and Racine County. Let's take a break here. When we come back, we'll continue our conversation.
Won't you let me die?
And now back to the right-wing war on education.
We are continuing our conversation about the right-wing war on public education in Wisconsin. Moderating this segment with me is one of the lead attorneys who is taking this case to the Supreme Court of Wisconsin, Frederick Melms. Frederick, there's a lot of things that I imagine even though you've done all the legal research on this and have been breaking this down, I'm sure you've learned a lot along the way in these conversations, haven't you?
I have learned just an incredible amount from this show. I mean, from generally, but from the show specifically. You guys, you and Kirk have done a great job with all of this over the past 8 weeks or whatever it's been so far.
Well, I love all the guests that we have that have joined us over the last several weeks. And today we are joined by Angelina Cruz, who is the president of the Racine Educators Association. And we have Mayor Cory Mason, who grew up in Racine. And you were telling me off the air that you want to make sure that people understand that not only are you invested in strengthening the public schools of Racine, you believe in the schools of Racine, that not all is lost. Tell us about that.
We have 3 kids that are in 9th, 7th, and 6th grade. They're all in Racine public schools. They're getting a great education with some great public educators. Angelina's members who do a great job educating our kids and kids across the district day in and day out. I just want to make it clear that public education still has space to succeed, really in spite of what's been happening, and really because of some great educators that are in those buildings that are holding up public education still to this day. But we're still falling short of what we need to do to be able to educate every child in the state of Wisconsin as the Constitution requires it. And these are really difficult times for public education, but it's not a reason to give up on public education. You can still get a great education in Racine Public Schools. I just want to make sure that people understand that that is still the case, and it is largely because of the great educators that are in those buildings.
And we've gotten through some difficult times. I mean, the pandemic, the way everyone had to be nimble and make sure the kids had what they needed, that had to add a lot of the stressors, and especially if you have people who are pushing back on policies. Angelina, you mentioned that growing up that you had a diverse educational background, because even I went to a parochial school in part as well when I was young. I went to public school and parochial school. Tell us a little bit about your experiences.
Yeah, I was born and raised in Racine as well. I did not attend Racine Unified School District, although my mother was a public school teacher for Racine Unified School District. But what I tell people often is I am Mexican American and partly Sicilian American as well. And so like it was written in the stars that I had to be a Catholic schoolgirl, right? So I went to parochial schools from kindergarten through 12th grade. And my first experience with public schools was in the University of Wisconsin school system. So I went to Madison, I went to Parkside, I went to UW Milwaukee. And so like I like to tell people that to frame the conversation, in that I don't have a problem with parochial schools. I had a fine experience. People have the choice to send their children to parochial schools, but to pay for that education is what I believe. And as my parents believe, they paid for all 4 of their children to attend parochial schooling from kindergarten through 12th grade. And it was fine. I know through my research as an educator, I have a master's degree in education policy, and I did sort of drill down on why do children who attend parochial schools exhibit success in life and their schooling experience. And it's largely because of their family background. And so it has nothing to do with the direct experience of being in school, and more the supports that they receive outside of school. And so I think there's this false narrative being sort of pushed about how public schools are failing, and that it's imperative that we provide these children who are maybe, not afforded all of the opportunities in life, this choice to attend this diametrically opposed system. And it's not that in any way, shape, or form. I firmly believe public schools are the only schools with the commitment, the capacity, and the legal obligation to serve every child that walks through their doors. And that is like it's a democratic institution and a cornerstone of democracy. And so it is incumbent upon the adults in the room who know better to sort of stand up and advocate for that and fight for that if we want like the civil society to continue. And so that's, my parochial school experience informed me that like I needed to, advocate for those who, need somebody to create the space to elevate their voices. And I think our state legislature is sort of imposing their will upon people and sort of painting it as like this is what people want. And if you talk to people who have children and they want them to have an experience, a full experience, a rich experience, and those are the things that public schools traditionally have always been able to offer. And right now the voucher system is really compromising that, and that it's taking everything away from everybody as a whole.
I think you bring up something really important, which is that people act as though we're having these conversations because we don't believe that people should have the choice to send their kids to parochial schools or to charter schools. If they find a program that they feel is better for their child, they have something else in mind for them. And Mayor Mason, are you hearing people say, well, you must not, you don't appreciate people having the ability to choose, or, having my child exposed to religious education, or, or the a banging of the drum of like, kids of color who benefit from parochial
Yeah,
and secondary.
no, I mean, what I hear most from parents is they just want there to be a good school to send their kids. That's really, I mean, parents on a day-to-day basis, they're not involved in these ideological fights that are happening up in the legislature. They want to know that there's good schools for their kids to go to, and they, oftentimes prefer that to be the local public school. We still have neighborhood schools that kids walk to. The people who live in those neighborhoods, they want those schools to be good schools. So, I mean, again, you might get into an ideological debate every once in a while, but what I hear from parents most is, why aren't we investing more in public education? Why aren't we investing in good schools for my kids to be able to attend? I want my kids to be able to have good choices in the public school system. That's what I hear, not the opposite. I mean, again, I'm sure there are some parents who do feel strongly and do like the voucher program, but what I hear most is parents in the neighborhood wanting there to be good public school choices for their kids.
As the number of the voucher schools in Racine is increasing, are you seeing like really bad voucher schools moved in? Because throughout the state, we've identified a number of them where these things will pop up in gas stations, they'll pop up in strip malls, they'll last for a couple of years. And then, they take a bunch of state money and move on. They don't really educate the kids. They don't, serve them lunch. They don't have a playground. They're just there to suck up some tax dollars. And
we did see some of that. I mean, when I was still in the legislature, there was a voucher school that closed down in the middle of the year. The teachers weren't getting paid for a time before that. And, I mean, they don't have to refund any of that money. And then those kids all wind up going to the public schools with no support.
Was that Life Skills?
I don't recall the name of it, but, you do see that it's not unheard of to hear of fly-by-night organizations. But I mean, there's so that there is a challenge in that, the argument is that the market will take care of making sure that, there's good schools for kids to go to. And there's a danger to that. I mean, it's a bit of a contradiction that public schools are some of the most regulated institutions in our society. And we put these voucher schools in an environment where we believe that no regulation is what's needed there. Yes. And there can be some dire consequences to that. Now, that's not to say that all the voucher schools operate that way, but it does create an environment where if somebody didn't have the best scruples could come along and provide education that, again, then when that doesn't work out, it's still the public schools who get asked to take up the resources needed to educate every child, because that's their obligation and their duty.
How incredibly disruptive and destructive. Go ahead, Fred.
Oh yeah, if I'm remembering correctly, I believe 40% of the voucher schools that have opened in Wisconsin have closed.
Wow.
So they're not really making it. It's also not really the market deciding these things when you're getting a government subsidy.
Right. Yeah. Just going to cash grab.
Yeah. So this isn't a free market sort of thing. It's just it's really it isn't that. I don't know what to call it. It's certainly not a free market experiment.
No, not at all. And Angela, I think that people often will point to their taxes. What are my taxes paying for? Right. So how is this affecting the tax bills?
Oh man, I'm gonna step up on my soapbox now because this is super triggering for me. So I got numbers from DI yesterday. So just like approximate numbers, back of the envelope math on this, but 31.2% of the Racine tax levy goes to vouchers, which is an insane percentage. And you have a list of all the institutions accepting voucher money. We do have some schools in Racine that are 100% funded by the voucher program. And so what I really I get stuck in, help me to understand how this is happening mode kind of sometimes. I think Racine is a really interesting political landscape in that I think people, it's urban and progressive, and we're a mixed bag in Racine. And so there's a lot of, I would say, fiscal conservatism and Cory can back me up or tell me that I'm wrong here, but that it drives a lot of narratives that whatever you're talking about, you got to be fiscally responsible and fiscal conservatism. And so when I look at the optics of the voucher program and the fact that property taxpayers are funding two parallel school systems, One is the public school system. And then the other is this there's no transparency, there's no accountability. And 31.2% of the Racine tax levy is being dumped into these unaccountable school system. There's this unaccountable school system. Like, that is just sort of mind blowing to me. And I don't know if it's because, you know, I often ask, like, well, where's the Racine Taxpayer Association in this whole conversation? Isn't this something that they should be outraged about? Like, I'm a property taxpayer. I'm pretty outraged about it. I think that we should have one system that is transparent and accountable, and that we know is providing the service that our children deserve, and that is the public school system. And, you know, the choice schools, the voucher schools, the parochial schools, the private schools, they can exist separate and independently of that. But it's just unconscionable to me that it's sort of just the public schools have become this pass-through for this unaccountable system. And it's a huge disservice, not just to kids, but to the community as a whole. So I don't want to get too into the weeds of like where that 31.2% is going specifically, but I mean, those are unaccountable voucher schools. And I think too, what confuses a lot of people too, because I know the stat on it is that less than 9% of the students entering the program each year are coming in from the public schools. The state has something called Third Friday Count. And so like families that take vouchers send their children to these voucher schools, private schools, parochial schools. And so Third Friday Count is sort of your having students in the seat day that will determine your funding for your local school districts. And so oftentimes what happens is the voucher schools are able to count that student for the per pupil expenditure, get the money after that Third Friday count, and then boot the kid out of the voucher system, but keep the money. So the public school has to absorb more bodies and services that they need to provide without the money attached to those students. And so I don't, we have to do more with much less than what we should have. And I don't know if that is something that's really top of mind for people either. It's an intentionally confusing system, much in the way that public school funding system is intentionally confusing. But there's just so much sort of shady business that needs to be elevated in the conversation. And I think people would be really not happy with what is happening with their property taxes. So
I would imagine, again, when people see their property tax bills, they want to know where it's going. And as the state lawmakers in Wisconsin continue to drain public revenues with these school vouchers, Mayor Mason, how do you absorb that? I mean, what kind of choices do you see yourself having to make down the road?
I mean, well, part of what we're trying to do is when we send out the tax bills every year, we do, it's about a hiccup last year, we do send out a breakdown of people's tax bills. So under state law, there's no indication that that's part of your tax dollars that are going to schools are going to voucher schools, right? It'll just say Racine Unified School District. And, you know, voters would and taxpayers would have no way of knowing that, you know, 3 out of every $10 that's given to the schools actually aren't going to the public schools at all. They're going to this voucher system. So part of what we can do is a municipalities at least inform people and be transparent about where their tax bills are going. Whether you are paying your bills to the city, the county, the technical college, or Racine Unified, everybody comes to City Hall to pay those bills. So they generally, I get all the brunt of whatever feelings people might have about paying taxes, which I'm happy to do because it maintains public services for us. But when people see sort of that breakdown, I get people raise awareness about it and say things about it, which are from people that I wouldn't usually expect people to raise concerns about it. So, you know, I mean, there is as Angelina said, a fiscal conservativeness to this community, and people don't want to pay for things twice or more than they have to. And so, you know, they're all for, hey, it's great that there's parochial schools down the street or private schools down the street, but what do you mean my taxes, like 30% of my school taxes are going to pay for these private schools? Like, you know, we have the 3rd highest tax rate in the state of Wisconsin here in Racine. And part of that is because we're helping to fund 2 school districts here locally instead of 1.
Unbelievable. And Angelina, I know that you work with teachers across the state of Wisconsin and are in communication with them. What can teachers do in the face of this incredible challenge?
I think that's a very difficult question to answer. Because I think most teachers aren't ed policy wonks, right? Like they don't super get into the weeds on vouchers and public school funding and this, that, and the other. They want to go to school, they want to be with their students, they want to teach. And they want to, help these little human beings grow into productive, happy, healthy members of society. And so I think like just advocating for what their students need in their classrooms on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah.
If you go to any teacher and ask them, what is in a perfect world, like what would you have in this class? Like what do your kids need that you don't have? There's a laundry list of things. I mean, that's why you see teachers, with GoFundMe pages and just different, how sad is that? So they're out there, they're trying to advocate. I would encourage the broader community to ask and then listen to teachers because they know what your kids need. And so I think just, teachers, use your outside voices when it comes to advocating for your kids is something everybody could do.
Well, you make such a great point. I mean, it is an awful burden to put on the people who are doing the hard work every day of helping kids reach their potential and say, all right, we're going to need you to also fix this system that is disproportionately harming students. And so Mayor Mason, I ask you, what do you tell your constituents in Racine? Are you telling them to call their legislators and ring that bell of alarm that this is?
Yeah, I mean, again, it's because the taxing system and where the revenues come from, people might entertain the idea as a parent using a voucher, but most voters don't think through, well, where does the money for that come from? Because we don't need to know where that is. I mean, again, when we talk to parents and things about what they need, I mean, they're worried about resources for the school, but I mean, I think one of the things that holds up public schools and keeps kids in the public schools is almost every parent or child that you'll talk to will mention one teacher or 2 teachers that really helped turn it around for a kid, right? Like if it hadn't been for so-and-so, it might not have happened. I have a sister who's been Rosemary, who's been an educator in Racine Unified for more than 20 years. And I meet former students of hers all the time who will tell me what an impact she had on their lives and setting them on a right course. So I think, part of what we want teachers to do is to use their outside voices and advocacy. But the other thing we want to do is really hold them up for the great education they provide to our kids and really reminding them that they really are the things most likely to set our kids on a path to be successful citizens and happy human beings that can reach their God-given potential. And that's really important to remember. I mean, there's nothing else that public educators do. They can continue to do that and do that well. And they do. I think that's one of the most important things that they can accomplish.
Go ahead, Fred, you were gonna say something? I don't want to.
Oh, no, I was just nodding in agreement with these two. Those were,
I was going to ask you, Fred.
those are great things for teachers to be doing. Now, if there's a teacher out there, a teacher that wants to share a specific story or share some thoughts that, potentially we could get in front of the Supreme Court, they should email me. And I don't know, we can put my email on Kirk's website or the Minocqua Brewing Coming Facebook page. But if there's a teacher out there who wants their thoughts known to the Supreme Court, my email's a good place for that to go, and we'll try to get it to them.
That's exactly what I was going to ask you. Like, how can if folks like Angelina and Mayor Mason help in this court case as you take it to the Supreme Court? And that obviously you need those conversations, those testimonials of how it impacts students. And Angelina, you mentioned something at the top of the show, which is the funding for students who have disabilities. And, the fact that charter schools, parochial schools are not required the same way public schools are, and that's a domino effect. People think, well, that they'll figure out a way, but children who are in education that is for diverse learners their families are already in a state of emergency. They're doing everything they can to help them reach a potential with a lot of challenges. Tell us a little bit more about that, since I know that that's something that you are very focused on.
Well, I mean, so I know we don't have much time left, but I just anecdotally, I was having a conversation with a special education teacher just a day or two ago. And we were talking about special education funding and the juxtaposition of how public schools are reimbursed and how the voucher schools are reimbursed, and how it was interesting that voucher schools are reimbursed at such a high rate, but are not legally obligated to provide services. So she was talking about a student of hers specifically and said, yes. And so I know at this particular voucher school, what they are using that money for is to hire aides to pull these children out of the classrooms, keep them in the hallway, and like to monitor those students until the public school educator who is provided to the voucher school to provide the IEP services is able to be with that child. So just thinking about just the logic, or rather lack thereof, of how the funding system works and what it is used for, I would beg of people to ask questions about that. And hold people accountable. And also, just quick plug, I wouldn't be a good local union president if I didn't say, if you're a teacher in Racine and you want to get involved in a meaningful way in advocating for schools and being involved in this voucher lawsuit, join your union if you're not a member already, and connect with the Racine Educators United office. And I am happy to be of assistance with anybody who wants to join the fight.
I'm so glad you mentioned that. Solidarity. Yep. I mean, that's the thing. Together, we're stronger. And I want to thank both of you so much. I don't know if you have any last thoughts, Mayor Mason, before we wind up our conversation here.
No, I mean, just look, this is a really critically important fight. Public schools really are a cornerstone of our democracy. For a working class town like Racine, public schools really, I mean, are we going to have a future workforce and a next generation of citizens that succeed? I mean, we believe in funding that in our democracy, or we don't. That's really what's at stake here. So really pleased to see the efforts to try to call this into question again. And again, just can't say enough about how important public education is to the future of our city and our democracy.
Thank you both so much. Thank you all so much. we want to thank Mayor Cory Mason of Racine, Angela Cruz, the president of the Racine Educators Association. And Fred, are you joining us next week for our next installment? Are you going to be hanging out with us?
I don't know if I'm on that one. I think Kirk will be back. So you guys, all right. You get him again.
We'll be talking to
I don't know. I generally find out week to week.
Gotcha. We'll be talking to Marva Herndon, president of the Milwaukee Public Schools Board of Education, and Ingrid Walker-Henry, an MPS teacher and vice president of the Milwaukee Teachers Education Association. Right now, our working title is Milwaukee Ground Zero for Vouchers in America. And so that will be our conversation as we continue this series of also, I want to let everyone know, a lot of these conversations are also available as vignettes. There are videos, there are reels. They're available on Minocqua Brewing Company's Facebook page. And so you're going to see yourself, Angelina, like in a little like a TikTok reel with, you guys did great. Thank you both so much for sharing your expertise and your insights today. It was really important. And I know people have learned a lot today. Thank you all so much. Everyone have a great night. Mike Creedy's up next with Devil's Advocate. See y'all later.
You're listening to The Right Wing War on Education, brought to you by the Minocqua Brewing Company.